And sometimes you have to bet on you. And that's one of the things I feel like we've lost a lot of in our society is we're not betting on ourselves. We're pleasing ourselves now post-COVID. We're pleasing ourselves. I'm going to take that vacation. I'm going to get me a new job. But are we really betting on ourselves? Empowering others to have the courage to say, you know what? I see you. I see you and I see what you don't want me to see. But I see you. And I need you to be that. Because when you're not that, this is what happens. And often I get leaders who say to me, well, this is what the brand is of the organization and this is what so-and-so expects of me. Because it means you're miserable and you're making your team miserable. So lead the way you know to lead. Meet in the middle. Meet in the middle and lead the way you know to lead. Because when you're not true to yourself, everybody in your life is miserable. You know, one of the hardest things I had to do in my life was I had to walk away from somebody who I can't even tell the true story of my life without talking about this person. But what I realized is as I grew, this person remained the same and did their best to ensure that I didn't grow because they needed me to be that same person. And I remember saying to this person, this is what I need from you. And if you can't give me this, then we're going to have to change the nature of our relationship. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do. Like seriously, the hardest. The grief process was real. This person was somebody who was a cornerstone in my life. And it's still very hard for me to talk about. But the day I chose me, the joy that has come my way, the stress that I don't have. But it was hard. It was hard having to figure out how to build a part of my life back that this person was a part of. And so I share that story to encourage everybody that you have to be true to who you are. You know who you want to be. And for many of us, we know who we need to be.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of our HR Heroes podcast. I'm incredibly excited because I have Adrina Walker with me here today. Adrina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Keenan, for having me. I'm super excited to be a part.
Well, I'm excited for our conversation today because I feel like we're going to have a real conversation about what's happening in the world of HR, but also in society as well, all the challenges that we face, the isolation issues, the lack of connection. And hopefully we can kind of give our audience a valuable conversation today about our perspectives in this and hopefully incite and inspire a couple other people to have these real conversations like we're going to. But before we get into that, I have to ask you a human-centric question. So Adrina, how's your heart doing today?
Today, my heart is full. My heart is full. I have so much to be thankful for. I'm super blessed, but I'm also very tired. It's been a crazy work week. And I got up this morning and went to the gym at 5 a.m. And if you know me, I am not a morning person. So that's a small miracle in and of itself. And then it's the beauty of talking to you. It's looking forward to winding down over the weekend with my friends. So my heart is full.
I'm really interested in that early morning wake up. I know that when I feel like I'm at my best, I am waking up at 5 a.m. and hitting the gym because I feel like in the world of hustle and bustle, it's so easy to get into the reactionary mindset of being present. And I feel like when I wake up first thing in the morning, the first thing that I do, and maybe you can like throw a little bit of shade in my direction, is I have to check my phone because I'm making sure there's no fires happening across the landscape of business. But it's so difficult for us to be present today, especially with all the distractions, all the notifications and everything that come our way. Why do you feel like it's so difficult for us to actually be here now?
So first of all, I roll my eyes because I'm not a morning person. My husband is, I am not. So 5 a.m. literally at the gym is a small miracle. But I think to answer your question about being present, we live in a world now where everything is so instant. If you want it, it's on the phone. If you want it, it's delivered to the front door. If you want it, swipe left, swipe right. Like it's so instant. So why should I be present when the minute I change my mind, I can go do something different? But what we forget is that we lose the true connection of being connected to somebody who's deeper than the instantaneous world that we live in. And so I really feel it's super hard to be present because we forget that. We forget that in those moments of instant satisfaction, we lose the deeper connections to build something greater. Most of us don't have the same email addresses we had when email first came out. Most of us, like, who remembers MySpace? I'm dating myself. But like all of those things no longer exist now because we've moved on to the next thing. But then when we think about real friendships, how many of us can say we have more than 10 real friends? How many of us can still say we're connected to our friends and family, that we know all of our cousins? Like, how can we say that? Are we connected to a church? Do we do something greater and bigger? So I think in that world of instantaneous, satisfaction, we've lost the ability to really understand how connection drives. And that to me shows up not only in our own personal lives, but it shows up just tremendously in the spaces where we work.
It's a really interesting concept. As you were talking about that kind of disconnection to the people around us, it has a
Mhm.
lot of secondary impacts. I was listening to a podcast a couple weeks ago, and they were talking about the lack of resiliency, specifically in Gen Z and appearing in Gen Alpha. And the interesting conversation or topic about this conversation was it's not because we always have these devices in our face, but it's our lack of connection to the
Mhm.
examples of resiliency in our own life. A great example is you and I both come from the African American culture. One of the things that I think we've experienced is hearing the stories of our grandparents who overcame great challenges that subconsciously impacted us and gave us examples of what it's like to be resilient. My great grandfather was a sharecropper from Arkansas. My grandfather was born in 1930 and was discriminated against because of the color of his skin. These people overcame great challenges and they passed those stories down from generation to
Mhm.
generation. But when we're disconnected from our family units today, often a lot of people don't get to spend time with their grandparents because my personal experience was born in Seattle. My dad was an entrepreneur. We moved to Michigan in 1997, and I spent my entire childhood disconnected from my relatives, really. And I didn't have a ton of the other experiences that were not intentionally passed down to me about times of hardship, the things that they overcame that gave me the example of what true resiliency was. And I feel like that in itself is what is creating that lack of resiliency in some of our younger culture today.
Oh, I 100% agree. Growing up very similarly, I come from a small town, Valdosta, Georgia. Well, very unique because I grew up with both sides of my family. I was in my late 30s before anybody in my extended family passed away. So I grew up with my grandparents, um, and I grew up with my parents and very present. I grew up in a big church family. I grew up in a big community. It was very hard for me to go anywhere and do anything because somebody knew somebody who knew somebody. But the beautiful thing about that is you get all those stories and you see all those things. You're being taught those things subconsciously and don't even realize it because you see your own parents fail. You see your own aunts and uncles fail. You see those, as we call it in the African American community, play aunts and uncles and cousins fail. And all you're realizing is, okay, if they can do it, I can do it too. It's almost being taught the example by seeing it. And even now that we live far apart, my family's still in Georgia, my husband's family's in Connecticut, we live in New Jersey. What I realize is that we don't spend time talking anymore. It's hard to tell the story of grandma's resilience when we just communicate by text message. It's hard to have those and show those examples when all we do is capture the snippets in social media. It's very rare social media shows true resilience. We just see the end result and compare that. And to your point, we are raising generations of children that have their own devices. So we don't sit at the dinner table and talk anymore. We don't have conversations. One of the things that my husband and I love to do because we have no children is we bring my nephew to New Jersey every summer and he gets very limited phone time and he has experiences. We ask him, what do you want to explore? What's the food for the summer? Last year was hamburgers and we ate everything from a 99-cent hamburger to a $200 hamburger. Like it was all the experiences. Like, what do you want? And he's like, I want fine dining and I want the chef to come out and I want this, 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 and this. And he's 13 at the time. He's 14 now. And we did that for him. Like we gave him all of those experiences. And in those experiences, there's teaching lessons and teaching moments. And so to me, I feel like that's almost a piece of our legacy as people that we have forgotten. We have forgotten that we are the keepers of the story for a reason, and that's to share and tell the story. So I think it's super important because even now in HR, when I hire someone in those two particular generations that we talked about, Alpha and Z, the questions are always, they said I didn't do my work. And I'm like, but no, you did this, but you didn't do it to the expectation. It's almost as if we've internalized that I am my work and my work I am. So anytime something's wrong, criticism means you hate me. And that's not the case. And that's simply, in my opinion, because we haven't passed down that resilience. We haven't taught resilience. And I'm noticing, especially from an HR standpoint, a huge divide between leaders who understand how to do that and teach that, and younger generations entering into the workforce who are crying out for it. And so that has created this whole shift of how much of this do we really own in the workforce, and how much of this should be done at home and in school and in other places. But when you think about business, if we want to be successful, no matter what the business, for profit, nonprofit, corporate, private, whatever it is, we're going to have to bring an element of that into the workplace. And I think a lot of industries are not comfortable with that right now.
We're in a time of transition because ever since the pandemic, I always think about, that as being kind of, and a lot of people refer to it as being like the moment where everything changed. And it seemed like long before, a lot of people were living to work. But after the pandemic, people now have a position of saying, I'm working to live. And that expectation comes from the blending or the blurring, if you will, between our personal lives and our work life. And it seems like there's a lot of organizations and unfortunately a lot of leaders who are looking for it to be like the good old days. But the question is, who were the good old days really good for? And I feel like we have to be curious enough to say we need to change up our leadership style. We need to change our priorities to be able to meet the next generation of people where they need to be met in order to sustain these workforces. Because I feel like just the expectation of work has completely changed. What do you kind of think about that?
Oh, I completely agree. And it's changed for the right reasons, in my opinion. When you have a near-death experience, I don't know anyone who was not impacted by COVID. I know someone who lost 10 people in their family due to COVID. Anytime you have some type of experience like that, two things happen. One, you need to process the trauma, because that's a trauma. And we are not talking about it as a trauma. It's a trauma. And two, what is the most important becomes really real. Really real. And so during the COVID pandemic, especially with a lot of my executive coaching clients, I found that many of them were saying, shoulda, coulda, woulda. And why wait? I just lost my father. I'm going to take this cruise. I'm going to do these things. And you come back renewed with a sense of urgency. A lot of people went to therapy. So life doesn't mean what it used to mean, because it can't. It's hard for me to imagine what life was. Thinking of my friend who lost 10 people in her family. She can't think about what life was, because what life was doesn't include those people. She has to create a whole new life now. And with these same people that are creating a whole new life, case in point, all of us, I think, at some level, are creating a whole new life post-COVID. We're now coming back into the workplace. And now it's different. So it was different when I got a, not meeting expectations on my performance review. I was like, okay, I can buckle up and I can figure it out because I want to be a part of this culture. Now it's, oh, that's how it is? Okay, well, let me go find a culture that fits me. And again, that ties, in my opinion, to the instantaneous piece of what we originally opened this conversation about. But what it has created is this amazing war for talent. And for leaders who can bridge these gaps between emotion and actual mental stability and emotional health and EQ and all those things in the workplace. Where I work in Vermont is not only one of the whitest states in the United States, it's also one of the states that is having the least amount of children being born. So there is a huge talent gap there, huge talent gap. We're not creating it. So we're going to have to do one thing. We're going to have to either retain it or bring it in. And so it is quite interesting that you would say that, because in bringing it in, it's like, okay, so now how do we keep it? How do we make it work? But if it's in a situation where I'm like, I don't feel welcome, I don't feel like I belong, I don't feel like I want to be here, I'm just going to pick up and go somewhere else. And so to your earlier point, I do believe that employers do have an obligation. And this is a hotly contested question, but I firmly believe, and I'm going on record, that employers do have an obligation to help deal with that, because the world isn't the same. And what motivated people before COVID is definitely not what motivates them now. People learn to do without in those 2 years. We learned to be home. Like, we learned to deal with different things. People have financial crises. People were like, okay, I got to downsize. I need to move. So everything around the world, from luxury to job to career to vacation, all of that has been redefined. And the employers that are doing it well are the ones who are accepting this and really taking the challenge head on. And those who are struggling are the ones that are trying to force people back into the box that they were in. But the box doesn't exist. And that's the fallacy that many employers are selling themselves, that the box still exists. It does not.
It's a crazy time to think about how quickly the landscape changed. And I think a huge catalyst of that was the necessity to put trust into your employees. So the pandemic happens March 17th. It's a Wednesday. Everybody's working from home. Our employers had to put a ton of trust in our teams to still continue to work and do the things that they did. And it's very interesting to kind of think about that box analogy of saying, once you let the genie out of the box, it's very difficult to push them back into the box as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a crazy time to me, especially in your space of healthcare, to think about how quickly the landscape has changed. But before we kind of start talking about how healthcare is being impacted by the pandemic and culture and everything like that, I want to kind of talk about your journey, if you will, to get into the space of HR, because I know in itself it's an unconventional one, but I feel like highlighting you as the HR hero, we need to hear kind of your origin story and how you found your space in this area of HR.
So my story is always funny, and I always laugh because it's definitely not only not traditional, it's completely agile. And it was driven by a couple of things. It was driven by rejection from traditional society. It was driven by my desire with the word no. No means nothing to me, but I was raised that way. I was raised that no means nothing. And it was also driven by my innate understanding and wanting to just really impact people. I think I was born an advocate. I was born a natural advocate. I come from a family of advocates. And so for me, it was almost second nature. So I ended up in HR the first time in my career because I had a best friend at the time, who is still one of my closest friends, who was trying to get promoted in the company she was working for. And she said to me, she goes, I need somebody dropped out in the interview. I need you to come interview for me. And they were doing on-campus interviews. I went to the interview. I was in like my shorts. I had my books in my lap. Like I was just like there for my friend. And they gave me 4 interviews and I kept going through the interviews. And I don't know anything of the process. I'm a good friend. So I'm like, she needs me. I'm going to show up and I'm going to show up well. And at the end of the 4th interview, a gentleman was like, can you please have a seat here and we'll be with you shortly. And I'm like, I'm about to be late for class. Like I got things to do. And my girlfriend comes down the hallway and she goes, they're going to offer you a job, accept it and don't make me look bad. And she runs back down the hallway and they offered me a job in HR. And I wasn't necessarily sold. And it took me about a good 6 weeks to get settled. And I was like, I like this. I like the ability to be able to impact people. I like the ability to make things happen. I love the engagement piece. And within a year and a half, I'd burned out. I'd burned out from all the employee relations investigations. And I didn't have the tools that I needed at the time to understand how to be a whole HR. And so I wasn't putting my own oxygen mask on first. I was not figuring out what was a balance for me. I was absorbing everyone's emotions, everything. It was all of those negative things that many junior HRs had happened to them when they started in it. You're so excited to be in it and making a difference that you don't understand the wear and tear and the mental toll it takes. And so after leaving HR, I took a role in operations where I had a leader who probably will go down in my personal history as the worst leader I've ever worked for. Back then, we didn't have the words for microaggressions and unconscious bias and systemic racism. It wasn't those things in 2007, 2009. We were talking about DEI, but it wasn't the culture that it is now. And I had a leader who did everything he could to make me fail. Everything he could to make me fail. And I'll never forget the day he told me, you really should give this up because I don't think you'll ever be great at it. You should do something that's a bit more fitting for someone like you. And I remember resigning from that role. And it took me 3 years to get over that trauma. And in those 3 years, I went back to school. I got a doctorate. I was like, you know what? I have to make the world better for other people. I don't have words for what I'm doing and going through, but I know somebody else is doing it. Because with the open impunity that he did it to me, there are plenty other people experiencing that. So then everything became, what is the collection of what I need in my career path? So when I go back into HR, no one has the ability to tell me no about anything. And so I started collecting roles and career experiences and mentors and sponsors and moving through. And I ended up back in HR again in 2019. So this is now a 10-year gap in between. And I was talking to one of my sponsors who at the time I was thinking about what was my next role going to be at a company. And she says, you should think about HR. And I busted out laughing. I mean, tears down my face, the whole thing. And I look up and she's serious. And I remember saying to her, I don't look like HR here. I don't sound like HR here. I am a non-traditional person. I think about the health of the person first. The business is secondary for me. Like I gave her all the reasons why this is not going to work. And she said, why don't you try it before you buy it? So we had a program at this particular organization where you're off for 6 months and someone has mat leave and you do their coverage. So I covered someone's mat leave for 6 months and had a leader who was like, do it the way you know to do it. And it ignited a fire in me because I was able to do it the way I'm known to do it, which is people first. And I'm known to take care of the health of people, build amazing teams, stand up great structures. The messier, the better. It can't be messy enough for me. That is what fuels me. And on top of it, making sure that our people come out whole when it's all said and done. I am the HR person that we'll have a meeting and I'll look at you and I'm like, Kina, what's wrong? It doesn't matter what we need to talk about today. What matters is you. What matters is the person in front of me. And I found that to be a very unique flavor to HR because it was very behavioral based. It was very holistic. And at the time, this was before COVID, that wasn't it. It was business, business, business. Get this done, get this done. Communications, PR, solve the problem, employee relations. And I'd be like, hello, there's some people over here. And better yet, has anybody noticed I'm the only person in the room who looks like me? Hello, like how do we work through these things? So I garnered a reputation for asking the hard questions and giving the hard answers, but also creating spaces for people to be able to ask me those questions and get those answers. And so the rest has been history. And now I've done it in different levels. I've done it on engagement levels. I've done it on senior HRBP levels. I've done it on HR executive levels. And my only goal with everything is to make sure that the legacy that I leave is one where the place is better for not just people who look like me, but for everyone. And that no one experiences what I experienced in my career between 2007 and 2009.
That experience weighs heavy on my heart because I have another leader who was on the podcast. Her name was Patty Rodriguez, and she works in the Massachusetts area. And she had a very similar experience to you, which kind of ignited her fire to go into HR and make sure that she wasn't treated the exact same way that you were and she was for the future. But doesn't that responsibility weigh heavy on you to be the one person, as an example, who looks like you, who's willing to have the tough conversations? How do you kind of deal with that responsibility? Because I know it doesn't exactly sit easy, especially when we're expected to show up as our best self, even though other people aren't going to.
So 2 things you said there. So I'll start with the second piece, showing up as our best self. One of the things for me is about best is best doesn't equal excellence. Best for me is transparency. So there are some days I'll tell you, I'm here 100%. You will always get excellence. You will always get it from me every day. But sometimes my best in excellence is, you know what? I need to tap out at 12 o'clock today. I've had all I can take. Sometimes it's Keenan, you know what? I'm not having a good day. I'm not my best self. I'm not having a good day. Forgive me for whatever you may hear because I need a minute. Like that to me is your best self. Your best self is your true self. It is being your true self and not being afraid to be your true self. Because if you're surrounded by the right people, they're going to accept you. And if they can't accept you, then it may be time to go do something different. But the responsibility, so this goes back to the resilience piece that we started talking about. So I was raised in a family to understand and know, and this is something in my whole family. And if my parents were here on the left and right of me, they would co-sign this, is you are blessed to be a blessing. And the decisions you make don't impact just you. They impact everybody else behind you too. I was raised that way. I'm also the oldest child too. And so for me, that carrying that responsibility was never a burden. I always found joy in knowing that this happened for this person because this is that. I've always found joy in that. You know, one of the stories that I love to tell is I had someone call me a couple of years ago that I hadn't talked to in over 10 years. And they actually said to me, when you said this to me back this helped me do this. And we ended up seeing each other like a random networking event. And I was in tears. And I was like, really? And they were like, yeah, I never forgot it. And in fairness and transparency, I had kind of forgotten that person because life goes on. But they had never forgotten that. And to me, that's why I do it. I do it for the one doctor who says, you ask me how I'm feeling today and giving me a moment to cry it out makes it easier for me to go do this surgery. Like, that is why I do it. I do it for the person who's like, are you real? When I started my job in Vermont, I had people stop me in the hallway, people of color, and like, are you really real? Are you the HR person? I was like, yeah, I am. And I'm really real. And so, to your point, does it get heavy? Sometimes it does get heavy, especially in spaces where it feels like I'm pushing the boulder uphill to make a difference when nobody wants it to go uphill. And so it does get heavy. And so that's when I have to cling to my faith. That's when I do all the things I need to do to decompress. I journal a lot. I write. I talk a lot. I do these things. I talk to people like you on podcasts. Like, we do these things to really expose it. Because then the more we expose it, the more it's shared. But does it get heavy? It does. But is it the best joy in the world? Absolutely. 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 And I will continue to do this work until I can.
It's so inspiring to hear that you have a deeper calling to show up as a good person in today's world, because it seems like we've lost that. And
Mhm.
one of the things that, kind of sparked into my mind was, in our previous conversation, you had mentioned something that I thought was incredibly powerful. A great example of the doctor or the surgeon who just needed a safe space to be able to express their feelings so they could show up as their best self. Something that you said to me previously was, we have all been trained to run on empty. And I use the analogy of an empty cup. It's very difficult for us to pour into
Mhm.
others when we have an empty cup. And you said, I think we've almost been trained to run on empty because people don't even recognize that they're not full. What does that kind of
Mhm.
mean? And can you kind of like extrapolate on that for the audience a little bit? Because I thought that was so powerful.
That is kind of heavy because I learned that myself. That's a self-reflection journey. We've learned as we've become conditioned inadvertently to deny what we need. It is, why are you crying? Why are you upset? Somebody always has it worse than you. We've created this hustle culture. We always got to be doing something. To lay down and take a nap at 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, that means you're lazy. Like, we've taught ourselves to run on empty. It's the whole, I can't give myself what I need because somebody's going to say something about me. Somebody's going to think that I can't cry at work because tears don't belong at work. Well, how do I not know that you just had a near miss car accident when you walked in the door and you need 45 seconds to just boo hoo because you just saw your life flash before your eyes? Because we don't want to deal with the ridicule of, oh my God, Adrina was crying in the break room. Like, what's wrong with her? Instead of just taking the time to say, hey, Adrina, are you okay? What's wrong? This is not normal for you. So we've become so conditioned to suppress those basic things that we need. And it shows up in being tired, disease, lashing out at people, broken relationships, anger. It shows up in all these negative ways. And it's simply because we have exhausted our emotional abilities to connect with ourselves emotionally and let it out. We've exhausted it. We've absolutely exhausted it. And then in places where we haven't exhausted it, it becomes a quick fix. It becomes the real quick fix. It becomes, what's your hobby? Some people drink, some people smoke, not condoning or giving license to either, but whatever your vice is, instead of just sitting with yourself and saying, am I really happy? Am I really happy? One of the things I say to my husband a lot is, couples always say, I love you. They always say, I love you. And I've been married 27 years. So I love you can become almost rote at this point. I take the time to tell him, I love you and I'm in love with you. Because I want him to know that I'm completely still in touch with those same emotions. They've matured, but those same emotions that got me when I first saw him in 1997. That's important. So people are like, do things that make you happy. Yeah, I get that. And I'm not mad at it. But are you really happy? Have you found joy? Oh, be friendly to everybody, but are you kind? And if you're not, what are you afraid of? What has surrounded you in your life that you cannot be these true things you want to be? When I do career conversations with people, one of the questions I always ask is, close your eyes. If money was of no consequence, you had all the family support in the world, your kids were taken care of, what would you be doing with your life every day? And when they answer me, I say, that's what we need to work on. It's not the next promotion because the job is not fulfilling you. It's not the next something somebody else told you. If you had everything in your life with no consequence and judgment, what would you be doing? And that gets you to your purpose. And so we're empty. Many of us don't know our purpose. We're not in connection with our emotions. We can't emote them. Some of us, to use your cup analogy, we got lids on it. We got lids. Like we just keep piling lids on top because we're so afraid of if we open it, we can't take it out. And then others of us who are in touch with that person of us, like I try my best to be and do my own work. I want my cup to be full. I want my saucer to be running over and I want to spill it on the floor. And I want everybody who needs to come get some to come get some. And I think that's the most important piece because how can you show up whole for someone when you're not full for yourself? Many of us are showing up fake. We're showing up fake and it's showing up in all of our spaces. So when that's a part of my approach to HR. So when I'm sitting and talking to you, I want you. I want the real you. I don't want the person who just walked in my office in the lab coat. I don't want the person who you think I think you should be. I want you to be you. Be 100% you. My team knows they have a get out of jail free card once a year. Get once a year. What is the one thing I'm asking you to do is you don't want to do for 30 days because we're not going to do. Like exercise that. And they also know that they're free to tell me, you know what, Adrina, this isn't working for me anymore. Because I want them to be full in all times. Because as HR, we give. All we do is give. That's a part of the job. It really needs to be on the job description, but that's another podcast. But all we do is give. And so if you're not full with yourself, if you're not connected with your emotions, if you're not doing that balance, you're depleted. And in my opinion, it's why many HR departments have a very negative brand. They're not connected with the people. I often say, if you want to find the employee engagement in the organization, see how the HR team is running. If there's a connected HR team, you normally have a high level of engagement. If the HR team is not connected, I don't think you should work there.
There's so many things there that just created so many insightful moments for me to kind of personally reflect on. I mean, when we think about showing up as our best self, showing up as our whole self, there are so many times in life when we've been told that doing that is not okay. I mean, I have a very close individual in my life who is incredibly empathetic and she feels her feelings incredibly well. And I've always told her that that is her superpower, but she always shies away from that because of her early life experiences. People always told her, you're too emotional or you're so sad. You know what I mean? Like those type of little innuendos get planted as a seed in our brain and stop us from showing up as our full self. And it's just so interesting to me that we continue to run down this path of being a lesser version of ourselves because we almost want to fit in with everybody else instead of showing up in our full, authentic, powerful self. And often people don't connect with that, or we have a perception that people aren't going to connect with that when that's really what everybody is truly begging for. I see so many people in society today who are trying to be a copy and paste version of somebody else. And I feel like that in itself is a great way to burn out and to feel so inauthentic that we lose sight of who we truly are. And it's just a crazy time for me to kind of sit around and look at my peers and look at how everybody else is trying to be somebody else instead of trying to be themselves. And if they just stuck with who they really were, they would have so many opportunities that would come to them. But we often shy away from that because of how we've been conditioned over the hundreds of thousands of millions of little micro interactions that stop us from showing up who we truly are. It's just a wild time.
It is. And my heart breaks for people who are stuck with that. And don't get me wrong, as you and I are talking about this, it sounds great to talk about, but it's a lot of work. This took therapy. This took self-reflection. This took me just steeling myself and saying, you know what? I'm okay alone. I am okay by myself because what's for me is for me and the right people will come along. And I think empowering others to have the courage to say, you know what? I see you. I see you and I see what you don't want me to see, but I see you and I need you to be that because when you're not that, this is what happens. And often I get leaders who say to me, well, this is what the brand is of the organization and this is what so-and-so expects of me. I said, but you're miserable and you're making your team miserable. So lead the way you know to lead. Meet in the middle. Meet in the middle and lead the way you know to lead because when you're not true to yourself, everybody in your life is miserable. Now, it's a lot to say that no one's telling you because not everybody takes feedback well. So, going back to what you say, all these little micro conditionings, but not everybody takes feedback well. So, some people are going to be like, no, I'm fine. Others are going to deject it. But the truth of the matter is, you told your truth. One of the hardest things I had to do in my life was I had to walk away from somebody who I can't even tell the true story of my life without talking about this person. But what I realized is as I grew, this person remained the same and did their best to ensure that I didn't grow because they needed me to be that same person. And I remember saying to this person, this is what I need from you. And if you can't give me this, then we're going to have to change the nature of our relationship. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do. Like, seriously, the hardest. The grief process was real. This person was somebody who was a cornerstone in my life. And it's still very hard for me to talk about. But the day I chose me, the joy that has come my way, the stress that I don't have. But it was hard. It was hard having to figure out how to build a part of my life back that this person was a part of. And so I share that story to encourage everybody that you have to be true to who you are. You know who you want to be. And for many of us, we know who we need to be. We know when we need to be a truth teller and we know when we need to be silent. We know when we need to be bubbly and not. We know that.
That's so interesting to me because I feel like we have that subconscious voice that always
Mhm.
tells us the truth. And often we
Always.
ignore it because we think that maybe it'll get better. And I've always talked about this in kind of my personal journey as well. It's, what got me here is not going to get me there. And often the
Mhm.
people that are in your life are not going to be able to go along this journey with you.
Yeah.
And one of the toughest things that you can do in the moment is leave those people because often, like you said, they need validation from you to help keep them in their
Mhm.
position, and they act as an anchor. And I know that's incredibly tough for so many people, especially as we get into, our late 20s, early 30s, late 30s and 40s. You have to make some of those accountable, selfish decisions for yourself to be able to move forward in life, or you're going to carry baggage that's not necessary.
And a lot of times that baggage stops you from going through the door you need to go through. A lot of times people inadvertently, because we all don't want to be alone, inadvertently say these things to you to keep you where you need to be. And it's stopping your own purpose. It's stopping what makes you tick. I've had leaders come into my office and say, I want to be president one day, or I want to be this one day. But I have to do this. I have to follow this person pattern. I have to do this. And I'm like, but you can't. You are not capable. This person is completely different. So what are you going to bring to the role that sets it apart for you? If you could do what that person did, you'd have that person's job now. So to your point, it's not going to get you there. What is going to get you there? And sometimes you have to bet on you. And that's one of the things I feel like we've lost a lot of in our society is we're not betting on ourselves. We're pleasing ourselves now post COVID. We're pleasing ourselves. I'm going to take that vacation. I'm going to get me a new job. But are we really betting on ourselves? Are we really saying, you know what? This is what matters to Adrina, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. I have a phrase at work, and my team will laugh when they listen to this. It's called catch me and coach me. I am going to do what I know is right to do as I am leading this human resources function. If my leaders have an issue with how I'm performing, I need them to tell me. But if they're not going to tell me, I'm going to continue to lead because clearly, if I was doing it wrong, they tell me. And so I use that philosophy to all parts of my life. I do me and my faith. I say my prayers, I make my decisions, and I do. And I'm solid with that. But I know sometimes folks may not understand, but it's not for them to understand. My journey is my journey. So you can hang in the journey and be blessed and enjoy these blessings, or we can go do something different. And that's fine too. So we have to be okay with allowing certain things to depart from us because the journey is our own journey. And if it's for us, it'll come back to us. 10 years later, I met somebody who was like, you changed my life so and so. And I was like, oh, I did? And you listened? Okay. like those things happen. And now this person is a dear friend and we stay in touch. But I use that as an example of, we have to bet on ourselves because we know what's right. We know what's right. And we got to be okay with failing forward. That's another thing we're not good at. We're not good at failing forward. We're not good at, oh, this didn't work out, So here's the lesson. This is what I do differently. Okay, great. Let me go on. It's the internal piece, like we talked about in the beginning. It's not the resiliency. It's the internal, oh my God, I did this. What is everybody going to think about me? And oh my God, did somebody catch a picture of me? And oh my God, am I on social media? So what? Will it define you for a second? A second. But you control the narrative. So if you feed into that, then don't be mad that the narrative went to the left. But you control the narrative.
It's so interesting to me that when I think about those moments, I'm consistently reminded in life that I am often thinking about myself so much that I don't even think about the other people in my life. And so when I get in a situation where I fail or I don't do something correctly, I naturally kind of catch myself thinking like, what is everybody else going to think about myself? Or what are they going to think about this failure? But often I have to remind myself that when other people fail, I really don't care because I'm so consumed with my own journey that often I don't even pay attention to those things. And that's a little slight reminder that I think people really need to hear is I know you're thinking about yourself way more than you're thinking about me. And so why would I
Exactly.
consume myself with the thoughts of what you're thinking about me as I'm thinking about you and you're thinking about me? It just doesn't make sense. It's just that little feedback loop that we've been trained to kind of think about, which is just so interesting to kind of think about from a philosophical or a philosophical perspective that we're all so ingrained in our own journey that often we don't even give ourselves a chance to think about other people. And if you took that perspective into all your situations, you would realize that everybody's too busy to even care about your failures. I want to talk about, because you're in the HR space in healthcare, what do you really think the future is going to look like in healthcare HR? Because over the last years, we've seen some amazing challenges when it comes to, compassion fatigue, turnover, burnout, resiliency. How are we going to be able to meet the needs of our communities as we kind of move into the next couple years of our lives?
That's a good one. That's a good question. And I've pondered it and I've been asked it several times. And so my answer is always the same. HR BPs now, especially BPs, are now part therapist, part executive coach, part generalist, part AI expert. If you name it, they are all of those things. And I find that the organizations who do this very well are those who understand that their people are now coming to work with different types of baggage. There are certain things that we used to teach in school and we don't anymore. So I use this example often. I get HR BPs and I get HR executives who say to me, my doctors aren't leaders. My nurses aren't leaders. And they got teams and they're not taking care of their teams. They're not developing their teams. And I often say to them, that's true. And then they give me the blank stare. And I say, that's because they didn't go to school for that. They don't teach leadership 101 when you're learning to be an OBGYN. They're not teaching leadership 101 when you're getting an LPN. They're not. So how are we meeting the gap? Because it's almost a duality of the role now. And we're not talking about that. We're not talking about the fact that we're asking them to be department chairs and division chiefs when they signed up to save lives. They didn't sign up to grow people. And so I think many of us in the healthcare space are having to understand that duality and understand what do we put in place to help our doctors, our nurses, our healthcare professionals be great at what they do, not just in the patient side, but on the employee side. Many hospitals have amazing, amazing patient scores. Like patients love them. Their employee engagement scores are in the trash. They are great with the patients in the room and they are terrible with each other outside of the room. And so it's getting them to understand that there's a duality to your role. Yes, you went to school to do this and you're phenomenal at it, but you also have people depending on you to keep the workforce going, to ensure that this hospital is here in 50 years for other people. And, what is your legacy going to be? I often ask that question. What is your legacy going to be? Not just for your patients, but for your people. And how do we connect that? How do we take that same nurture and care and practice and bring that into our people leadership? So to me, that's the state of healthcare HR, is understanding how to bridge the gap to help all of our leaders, be it medical, be it administrative, to understand that there's a duality to the role. It's not just the patients we serve, but it's also the people we lead. And that to me is what is going to make sustainability. It's not going to be, oh, we just need to be more AI and all this other stuff. Yes, that's coming, it's here, that's great. But at the end of the day, people are people. We still have people. We still have people. Somebody's got to punch the question in. Like, we still have people. So how are we bridging that gap to make sure that HR is leading the way in that, and leading the way in helping people understand, yes, this is what you went to school for. Yes, this is what you give the patients. Yes, this is what your academic papers and research on. But how are you leading and developing your people? That's the piece. And now post-COVID, when people are coming back to work and we're asking them to work with their own trauma, like, are we really having mental health nurses? Are we offering employee family assistance programs? And not just saying, hey, we offered it, but are we tracking the metrics to understand how our teams are engaging with it? What are the top issues? And if there's no engagement, how are we driving that engagement? I'll never forget this. Actually, I'll use myself as an example because it's a true story for me. I was driving to work. Someone ran into the back of my car. But it wasn't enough for us. Police were called and all this other stuff. I get back in the car. I drove to work. And I'll be forever grateful for the leader who said to me, you need to go home. You are not okay. Now, she let me talk about it for 45 minutes in her office. And she goes, but you need to go home. You are not okay. So I often tell people, imagine what your doctors and nurses are coming to work dealing with. And then we're asking them to not only be great, but to save lives. As HR, we have to be in touch with that. We have to be in touch with that. And that is the piece I really feel is missing. And I think that goes for any industry. You have to be in touch with what is going on outside of your people, what's going on outside of the workplace, because we're in a space where life and work have merged, and we can't undo that. There's no way to undo that.
I mean, we're in a place where the work-life balance conversation has been popular over the last couple of years, but I feel like we're officially at a place where it's more so work-life integration. Because like you said, the line between work and life have blurred, and we need to figure out how work fits into our lives and how our lives fit into work. And it's just so important to be able to kind of re-emphasize the element of the human connection that we're talking about here today. You getting in a car accident, prioritizing, I got to get to work, and having a leader stand up for you and be like, hey, listen, you might not see it right now, but you're not okay. And sometimes we just need somebody to hold that space for us, which is super important. As we kind of start landing the plane here in our episode, I want to use a question who came from our previous guest to kind of hear what your perspective is, because you recently, in our last couple of minutes here, touched on the topic of AI. And this individual's name is Jeff Bennett, and he wanted to ask you a question, which was, how do we, as a profession of HR, make AI better for the correct usage in our space?
That's an amazing question. And I am fascinated by it. For the last year, I've been really submerging myself in AI and understanding what does that look like and playing with fake strategies. So I'm that HR person that has a home office that's covered with markers and post-it notes, because I'm always thinking about what's next, what's next, what's next. And so one of the things I thought about is, what is the purpose for AI in your organization? And that's going to be different. Go slow to go fast. Like, don't just jump on the AI train because everyone's doing it. What does it mean in your organization? And do you have capability and capacity to make it mean that way? And if you don't, what's the long range plan? So if there are roles so here's an example. There are roles that could probably be automated tomorrow. Scheduling, payroll. There are roles that could be automated tomorrow via AI. So what are you doing with those folks? So if you know this is where you want to go, how are you working backwards? How are you saying, okay, Adrina and Keenan, in 4 years, you're going to have a different job, because your job in 4 years will be fully automated. So here's our workforce development programs for you. Here's how we can send you back to school. Here's tuition reimbursement, because in 4 years, this is your job. Now, Adrina and Keenan have 4 years to decide, do I want to stay on this career path? Do I want to do something different? Do I want to retire? Do I really want to jump foot first in this? And as an organization, we have now secured our succession as best we can for the next 4 years. So instead of embracing it with fear of, oh my God, it's going to take my job away, embrace it with, this is what it means for our organization. This is when we're going to pilot and start playing with it. This is when we're fully operational. This is what it looks like. This is how we communicate it to our people. This is how we upskill our people. This is how we show the integration between the two. This is our market differentiation because we've done that. Now we're an employer of choice. And so I think that's the way, in my opinion, we need to look at it, as AI is a part of our long-term succession, business and people. And how we integrate it is important, and how we communicate it to our people is important. But what it means to every organization is different. A technology organization may jump in feet first, no firewall. A hospital organization where we have patient privacy, we got to be a bit more strategic. So it's those things. It's sitting in a room and asking, and it's not the top of the house deciding. It needs to be an integrated business decision. Who's going to be most impacted? They need to have a voice at the table.
We have to be incredibly intentional, is what I'm hearing you say there. We have to be intentional with how this technology is not going to be used as a replacement, but as an accelerator. And I feel like
Yes.
that positioning of it, I feel like is super important. You know, this conversation has been incredibly insightful, and it's been so cool to be able to hear your unique perspectives, your lived experience, and all the things that you brought to the table through the tough conversations that you've had throughout your life and your career. And I know that you're making a tremendous difference for your organization and everybody who has a simple conversation with you, maybe even 10 years ago. So, Adrina, you know, as we kind of wrap here, I want to give you the opportunity to pose a question for our next guest. What do you got?
So my question is a people question. It's a field question because that's the type of HRBP I am. Is how do you make space and show up in a way that's meaningful to those you lead? And how do they articulate that to you?
I love that. Well, that's an amazing place for us to be able to kind of put a stamp on today's episode. Once again, Adrina Walker, thank you so much for coming on the HR Heroes podcast. It's been a blessing.
Thank you so much, Kenyon, for having me. Total joy.
All right, guys, that's a wrap. Catch you in the next one.